Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's exciting webinar, Enhancing Workplace Safety Through Technology, Mastering Critical Control Management with myosh. We are thrilled to have you join us as we dive into how technology is transforming critical control management to not only reduce workplace incidents, but also to significantly improve safety outcomes. My name is Christina, and joining me today will be Adrian Meneses, Director of myosh, and a little later on we'll be joined by Josh Bryant from Mitchell Services, who is an active user of the CCM module within myosh. Today, we will be showcasing the innovative features of the myosh CCM module and how it integrates seamlessly into your daily work processes. Our goal is to show you how these advancements in our technology can help your organisation stay compliant, transparent, and responsive to potential risks. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording today's session, so if for whatever reason you have to log off early, don't fear. We'll be emailing a recording of this out to you all later on today. I also would love to encourage you all to get as involved as possible and ask as many questions as you can think of throughout the session. Your participation is key to making this webinar as informative for you as possible. So please don't hesitate to jump in. If we don't get to your questions throughout the webinar, there will be an interactive Q&A at the end. So whether you're looking to enhance your CCM processes or simply just stay ahead of the curve in workplace safety, this session is ideal for you guys. Now I will stop yapping on and I will hand over to you, Adrian.
Great. Thank you, Christina. And thank you everyone for attending today. So what I'll do today is I've got a few PowerPoint slides. I won't be killing you through PowerPoint, but just to enhance the presentation. And then I'll also be showing the system as well as we go. So let's move on to the first slide. First of all, I'm going to learn how to use PowerPoint. Here we go. Let's just jump to there. So what is critical control management? So basically it's a structured approach to managing the most crucial controls to prevent significant health and safety instances known as material unwanted events, or MUEs. Don't let the terminology put you off. Basically, it's to prevent serious incidents, and it's to manage your controls that you have in your organization and focus on the controls that are important. What you'll see on the diagram there is this diagram you'll find, or something very similar you'll find in the ICMM guides online. And Josh can probably expand on that a little bit later. But it's a cyclical process. So it's a process where you identify MUEs, material unwanted events, you identify controls, and you work through that process, but it doesn't stop once you've done it. So many organizations I've seen, they put some effort in, they do this, but it doesn't continue on. And that's where technology can help. We can help you make sure that it becomes part of your everyday processes within your organization. Okay, so why do it? Okay, so first of all, it prevents serious incidents rather than reacting to them. A lot of people spend a massive amount of time working on incident reporting processes, and you obviously need to have your incident reporting processes and your other processes working well, but they don't spend a huge amount of time working on critical controls and critical control management, which is the preventative side of it. So they're often working on what's urgent, so the telephone ringing, someone asking for something, as opposed to what's important. To me, making sure that you don't seriously injure someone or kill someone in the workplace is the most important thing that you could be doing. Hence, critical control management, in my opinion, is absolutely vital. You need to be able to comply with current and upcoming legislation, and legislation is coming thick and fast. There is already legislation in many places which essentially is saying that you need to be managing your critical controls and your critical risks. The sorts of things that I know that various different inspectors and so forth will come in, especially with a serious incident, or even without, they'll ask you, what are your top 20 risks, serious risks, and what are you doing to prevent them from occurring, or the incidents from occurring? So it's vital that you can actually do that from making sure that people remain safe, and also that you protect yourself. So an example of new legislation, and this is specific to the mining industry, but what I see is the legislation is likely to be coming through in most areas in the future in relation to critical control management. So in this particular case, in their industry, it's becoming a law that you need to be managing your critical controls in your health and safety management systems.
Yeah, the important one here, Adrian, is that it used to be discretionary. So it used to be discretionary that a mining company could choose to have critical control management, but by June 2026, it's now in legislation that every mining company within Queensland must have this. And we do believe that more and more legislation will change to incorporate critical risk management.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. So there's lots of reasons to be doing it. One is you have to do it, but that's, to me, the main reason is you should want to do it to protect your organisation and to be focusing and more efficient on what you're doing. So if you eliminate incidents, then you're taking the entire other lot of work out as well. You're focusing on what's important. Okay, so why do organisations struggle with this? What are the problems that people have? A short answer, and I'm going to get into longer answers in a second, is that they lack the tools and the knowledge to do this. Now, the tools generally don't work together for the majority of systems that are out there. So they're not designed to manage critical controls. They're designed to manage safety in general, managing incidents, hazards, doing inspections, etc. But you need the right tools to do it, and I'll get into the tools in a few minutes. You also need the knowledge, and I think the knowledge isn't hard to come by. There's lots and lots of free resources available. There's also organisations that can provide consulting services as well in critical control management. As I mentioned before, the ICMM guidelines that are freely available on the web are a very, very valuable source of information. I think, Josh, where did you glean information from for managing critical controls and risks?
Yeah, so that was a good start for us, Adrian. We had no idea about critical risk management. We'd seen other clients use it, but doing it internally, starting with that International Council of Metals and Mining. The resources are free. There's 2 guides. So one is about the implementation of critical controls, and one is almost like best practice. So yeah, that's where we started. They're just available online if you were to Google ICMM critical control guides.
Yep. And I think, again, it's important to note, while those guidelines were written for typically the mining industry, the actual principles and the concepts apply globally, whether it's mining industry, construction, or whatever, any industry. So I've seen lots of companies use those guidelines outside of mining, and they're equally as applicable. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other reasons why organisations struggle, just in a little bit more detail. And this sort of leads us into the software side of things. Data's coming from multiple sources. Without integration, there's no automation to automate processes, and there's no way of configuring, in many cases, to get it to work the way you need it to work. So there's 3 key things there. The biggest one of those is integration. So people are using multiple systems. So they're using systems to do verifications, maybe in inspection form. They're using other systems to store their critical, they've got their bow tie diagrams or information about the critical risks in a disk drive somewhere or a filing cabinet. When you need to produce the reports, you then have to pull the information from one system, format it in a particular way, and then push it into a report that someone can look at, and then it won't be real time. It'll be something, I've seen companies spend, when they're trying to do this manually, spend a week just trying to put their reports together. Josh, you've gone through that process, haven't you? Because you've gone through like a manual type process right through to an automated one. So what was your sort of experience on the manual type side of things?
Yeah, Adrian, we did a lot in Excel, I guess, and what we found is everything was quite disjointed, that we'd have like Excel files with, some of our bow ties or our risk assessments, and then our inspections we're doing in, another format. Might be just a Google form or just a form you could do online. And it was just more, everything was disjointed. Everything just, wasn't together, wasn't integrated, they were very separated. There was no like integrated approach for how we could do it based on the tools that we had available.
Yep. And that's a common thread that I'm seeing in lots of places. The other side of it is CCM is not embedded into everyday processes. So what I've seen a lot of organizations do is they set it up as a separate sort of process, and then there's extra workload. So someone's already doing a whole lot of inspections and verifications and so forth through their current processes. And then there's a whole new lot of processes that are being pushed onto them. And one thing is it means it's an increased workload, but it's then, if in many cases it's not even embedded into their everyday processes, it's just something that gets tacked on. And if the skills leave the organization, or the people who know these processes and understand them and who know how to build the reports manually, then if they leave, then the processes typically fall down and then they just don't happen anymore. In some of the bigger organizations, I see they're employing 2, 3, 4 people per site just to manage these processes. So it adds a fair bit of workload to what they do. So it's got to be embedded into your everyday processes. It shouldn't add more workload to, once it's set up, it shouldn't add additional workload to people in the workforce. I also come across organizations that are looking at it and they go, oh, yeah, we don't have the resources. I don't know where to start, and I don't want to get it wrong. So then they're stuck in inertia. They don't do anything at all. And when we looked at that diagram on the previous page, it's an improvement process. It's a continuous improvement. It's not something that you start and you say, yes, I've done it, I'm finishing it now. It's something that you do, you get feedback, and then you improve what you've done. Now, if you don't do anything, then there's nothing to improve, and doing something is better than doing nothing, even if it's not 100% right or as good as it could be. So some of the things that I'll show you, you don't have to do everything. You can do part of the process, and then you can start getting to other parts of the process over time. So I've had organizations build their bow ties and identify their critical risks, and then they've looked at verifications later, or they've done various different, or they've looked at the performance standards or the other things that you need to, or you should be recording with regards to controls. So the other thing is it's actually easier than you think, especially when you've got software to guide you through the process and to allow you to have that structured. So while some of this might sound reasonably complex, it's actually not. It's not rocket science. It's actually fairly simple. Okay, so I'm about to get into the software now and just sort of show you, what this is, how this actually works. So one of the first things you do is you create a list of material unwanted events. So Josh, where would you get that list from?
Yeah, I guess you've got to define, well, what's a material unwanted event? And for us, some organisations, it's multiple fatalities, 2 fatalities. For us, a material unwanted event for us was a single fatality, Adrian. We then just looked at industry data where we could find it, and looked for what are the scenarios where these fatalities could actually happen on our work sites. Where are the highest energies? Where are the highest risk tasks? And could a material unwanted event come from those? So that's how we sort of narrowed down our material unwanted events. There's no right or wrong answer with the number of them, Adrian. I've seen some companies that have got 8, some that have 14, and Mitchell Services, we've got 20 because of the variety of environments that we're in.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so you can find them in lots of different places. And it's good to do a little bit of that research. But again, still start with something. You can always add additional ones later, I guess. So for each material unwanted event, so that's the event you don't want to happen, you then identify the causes, the consequences, how you're going to prevent it from happening, and how you're going to mitigate it if the event does happen. So let's jump over to the software itself. So what I've got at the moment is a list of critical material unwanted events in here. So uncontrolled release of stored energy is the example that I'm going to use today. So I'm going to go into that particular event, and I'm just going to make that full screen for the moment. And inside here, what you'll see is there's a variety of information. There's the risk scenario, the associated hazard, and then a whole series of other fields. Now, one thing I will point out, there's no one way of doing this. People have different workflows and different statuses, and that's where configuration and getting the software being able to be changed to be able to handle that. So you may not want to store all this information. You don't have to. You might have approvers. You may not have approvers, depending upon the size of your organisation. So you can decide how you want it to work. You might have review processes where you want this to be reviewed on a monthly, weekly, annual basis, whatever it might be. So you'll typically risk rate it, and then you'll have a series of controls, preventative controls associated with this MUE, and then you'll also have mitigating controls. So this is how to stop it from happening in the first place, and this is how to what you do if it does happen. How do you mitigate it? How do you prevent the most serious consequence from happening? You'll notice that these are marked as critical or non-critical. Now, we didn't build these by simply creating a new adding a new record in here, although we could have. What we actually did is we built these through using the bow tie diagram, and that's what I'll do right now. So I'm not going to build one from scratch, although I will sort of go to a blank one in a little while. What you'll see in here is a digital bow tie, and this is very different to one that's been done through a flow diagram process which is going to stay relatively static. So the information that you saw in this here, including things like your controls, preventative mitigating controls and so forth, are all represented in this bow tie. And when you build one of these things, you literally start from scratch. You can type in the name of the unwanted event, you can add your causes, you can add your preventative controls and so forth. And that will then build those back-end documents that store all that information. So when we were talking before integrated, this is one of the pieces of integration. You don't have information being stored everywhere. Everything is stored within the system itself. So everything about that control is stored inside the control document within the system. Everything about the MUE is stored within there. You're not going from an Excel spreadsheet to a Word document to a PDF to wherever. Okay, so one of the things that makes it useful as an ongoing process is that if you identify additional controls, for example, you can go in and you can just add that additional control into the system. So new control. Okay, so when you go into these, what you'll sort of see here is that then creates the control document. What it's doing is in the background, it's creating the control document. It's not a critical control at this stage. It's a non-critical control until we define it. I can now go into that control and edit the control document by simply clicking on the corner and then fill out the rest of the details for that particular control. So you'll notice here that it's provided me with a series of information. I can now edit that and I can look at its effectiveness. I can make it a global control so it can be used on other bow tie diagrams. I can set whether it's critical or not, and a series of other things in this particular document. So every one of these boxes relates to a back-end document that has a process or a workflow. So there might be approval processes behind and review processes that email people and tell people that when things are happening. So Josh, one of the things that you'd be doing when you're building this is you'd be identifying your critical controls. And they're the ones where you want to, in fact, focus the majority of your attention. How would you specifically identify and determine what's critical and what's not critical?
So, good question. Probably one of the most important things that you'll do as part of the process is defining what's critical and not. We need to make sure that what you've put as a control is actually a control, right? That that's an act, that it's a system, that it's it's measurable, it's auditable, that it's actually define that it is actually a control. For us to define whether it's critical or not, Adrian, businesses use a decision tree. There is one in the ICMM Critical Control Guide, and it asks questions like, does the control prevent, detect, or mitigate a material unwanted event? Does it prevent initiation? Is it the only barrier? Is it effective for multiple risks? And is it independent? So use that decision tree to then determine which ones are critical and which ones are not. And the ones that are critical are the ones that you then do the performance standard for. And what's good about the myosh system is that that document has been created as you add it to the bow tie.
So that's a good point there, Josh. And I meant to show this a little bit earlier on. So this is a control document in a little bit more detail. Again, you can decide how far you go and what you enter into these documents, and these are completely configurable. So you might be wanting to store additional information or less. You might want to have different additional workflows for approvals. But one of the things you'll see here is there's a whole lot of other information that you can record, like your monitoring plans, your performance requirements. So what does it depend upon? How should it function? And a whole series of things like that. So as you said, if it's a critical control, then you start delving into more detail. You did mention something a little bit earlier on in an earlier discussion about how many critical controls should you have on a particular cause.
Yeah, so Adrian, we've been lots of industry have been speaking, right? And there's a lot of people out there trying to help other businesses work through this critical critical control programs, and some are going to businesses with 400 critical controls. Like you will not be able to manage that. You've got to verify all those. You've got to do a performance standard. So it really is going through that decision tree and determining like what is actually critical, right? What will stop a material unwanted event? What of those controls will stop a fatality? And they're the ones that matter. As someone said to me, if everything's important, then everything's equally not important. So that's why it pays to get what are the critical controls right. And with that configuration, Adrian, like the one you've got pulled up, for our critical controls, we've got items such as like, how is that control meant to function? How available is it meant to be? What's its reliability? Can it survive a damage event? Is it dependent on other controls? Is it compatible with other controls? And is there a redundancy if it fails? So the biggest standout for me, Adrian, is that you can go from the bow tie and click on your critical control, and you can actually have a look at the detail. And it makes critical risk like a live document. It actually makes it that if it's accessible, you'll use it. If it's accessible, you'll review it. If you can access it, it's auditable. So yeah, it's just great.
Yep, brilliant. Okay, so what we're looking at here is, again, getting back to the performance standards and so forth. So defining, which ones are critical, defining performance standards, defining accountability. So if no one's accountable for things, then sometimes nothing will get done. So you'll sort of see inside here, you've got things like who's the control owner, for example, will be defined inside the defined inside there. So it can be emailing those people when something happens. So there's notifications that people can be looking at. They can be responsible for review processes and so forth. So it's a matter of saying, well, this is really important. It's a critical control. We've got to take it seriously. We've got to make sure that someone owns it, basically. Someone's looking after it and making sure that it's going to continue to function. So if it's a smaller organization, you might have one person that's doing them all. If it's a larger organization, you might split it into different accountabilities. So they're things that are quite important. And again, as Josh said, you just simply click on the corner here and you go straight to all of that information that's available within the system, and that can be flagged. Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at is, and let me just jump back to the PowerPoint if it lets me. Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at is the setting up your verification processes. So it's one thing to define your critical controls, your unwanted events and your critical control and your controls. The other one is to verify that they're working. And that's part of that diagram that I showed earlier on. You've got to be able to look at it and say, okay, well, how do we know that our critical controls are functioning and that they're not failing? And also that we're doing enough verifications. So if you're not doing the verification processes, then the rest of it becomes a lot less useful. So let's have a look at how the verification processes work. And this is where integration becomes also extremely important. The other parts of your system should be able to talk to your CCM process. So for example, if it's even an external maintenance system, for example, or inspections or audits or observations or anything else that's in your system, even an incident which has occurred should be able to integrate into the overall process. So let's go through an example within the system itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to, say, I'll just open them in a new tab. I'm going to jump over to my inspections module. And in my inspections module, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a inspection. Now, I could be doing this on a mobile app if I wanted to, out in the field, even without internet access, and it synchronizes as required. So you could schedule these. So if you want to make sure they always happen, you can have them scheduled so they happen every day, week, whatever it might be, and there'll be different sort of scenarios. With your inspections, and I've seen different companies handle these differently. Some organisations, they include their critical control verifications inside their everyday inspections, and then they highlight which ones are actually critical by clearly demarcating them with icons and extra information in there. I think Josh, in fact, Josh is holding up his mobile at the moment. So this is when Josh's team does an inspection out in the field, they'll see an icon which essentially is prompting the user to say, hey, pay a bit more attention here. This is something that could kill someone if it's not monitored and tracked and so forth. So extremely important. Now, what I've got here is I've just got it on the web for the moment, but the mobile could equally be done. This is where the automation comes into play. So again, all of these things are no code configurable by our customers, and that you don't have to be overly technical to do this. So we train up our customers on how to set these things up and to be able to be self-managing, basically.
Yeah, I can vouch for that, Adrian. It is pretty straightforward. If I can do it, anyone can.
Yeah, so it's not designed to be rocket science. It's designed to be simple, so you can set up your forms quite easily. You can set up your automations. So the automations for saying, well, if I click no to this question and I put some information into the answer here. So I'm just going to enter the area here. I'm going to say, okay, tags not applied here. Okay, so I could then go through and finish the rest of the inspection. So I can just scroll down and just do whatever else. So I might have things to sign if I'm on the mobile. I might be taking pictures and putting in extra information, etc. So I've complete one thing I will just note for a moment before I go too far is outside the dashboard. Let's go back to CCM for a moment. What I'd like to just note here, everything is green. So everything's looking pretty good at the moment. But that's about to change. Because I've said no to that question, I put a comment in. The trigger is I'm completing the inspection. And what's happening right now is it's now running some automations in the background, which are then doing a whole series of things to make sure that alarms are going off, basically, that we've had a critical control verification that's failed and we need to know about it. So I'm going to go to my critical control verification. Sometimes it takes a minute or so, but it's usually within 15 seconds. So I've just heard a ping on my laptop. An email has hit my inbox, and it's hit other people's inboxes as well. And it's also come up on their mobile apps with push notifications to say, hey, we've had a failure here. Now, we don't panic. No one's been hurt. We've just noticed that one of our controls isn't working, but it's a precursor to a major incident. So we need to look at it fairly urgently. You can see here, control issues, it's gone to orange. I can go into that particular unwanted event now. It's flagging it. And it can also be on the dashboard as well, for that matter. So I can scroll down through there and I can see straight away that particular control has an issue. So I'm going to drill down into that. And again, the emails with links would have gone out anyway, but you can see that from the system. I can update anything about this. You can see the status of the controls changed to not effective. It's warned people. It's also updated the information that I did on that inspection. It's updated that information into the control history. So I've got a complete history of everything that's happened to this control via my different verifications, all in one place, and links back to those verification processes, whether it's an observation, an inspection, or whatever else has actually happened. Now, the other thing we can be looking at is we can be looking at the bow tie process. So if I refresh that bow tie now, what that'll now do on the bow tie, it's live. It's showing me very, very clearly that we have a problem with this particular control. So we're looking at that information and we can again open that up. So we can open the control from here and do exactly what I did before by simply clicking on the corner and then review that control. And of course, the control owner would be onto it fairly quickly. Okay, so things that we do, we set up our processes like our inspections and verification processes. We set up our automation, and we then go through and make sure our workflows are defined within our processes like our control documents and our unwanted events. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at here is what else has it done? Okay, so I'm going to go into here for a moment, and I'm going to jump over to my critical control verifications. So not only did it change the statuses, but it also went and created a verification document with a whole lot of information in there that you can define what you want to collect. So this is something that, as you're doing inspections, it's just building up verifications, whether it's a pass or a fail. So you want to be recording how many have you done? How many times have you verified this control? How many passes have you had? How many fails have you had? You want to be able to do some reporting on this. So you can see from here, where in this case, you can decide what information you want it to automatically collect, but it's collecting things, the date that it was done, what critical risk it applied to, what was the control that it was verifying, the date it was verified, if someone's verifying that it's correct, who verified it, even down to the asset number, for example, of what's being checked. Now, this information is extremely, and then links back to, where did it come from? So this information is extremely useful, because what you can then do is you can jump over to your dashboard, and then you can build widgets that then graph that information. So in this particular case, what I've got is a bar chart with all my critical unwanted events, MUEs, I should say. And then I've got all of the verifications that I've done over a period of time. So we can start asking questions about some of these things. So if you see too much green, for example, you might get a bit worried that people are using the exercise as a tick and flick. And you start to go, okay, are people doing this seriously, or are we actually just passing? So you can look at it from a data perspective. I'd be concerned about this one over here. We've only done 3 verifications. Why? If we're not verifying it, we might get the actual outcome that we don't want. So we need to pay some attention on some of these ones where verifications aren't happening. Or maybe we're just not doing that process at the moment. So you could be asking those sorts of questions. As we scroll through here, you could build all sorts of verification processes. So this is about that particular one. We're setting KPIs if required. In this case here, we can slice and dice this information. So that verification information is an absolute goldmine. It's producing so much information that you can then review and analyze to see how you are traveling with your CCM processes. And this is where you're getting your feedback. This is where you're getting your continuous improvement. And then looking at what's going on. So in this case here, it's against equipment number. So I'd be concerned about that one there. We've only got two verifications done. I'd be asking why. And so someone might say, well, yeah, that piece of equipment's a bit hard to access, so we don't bother going out there. It's a bit difficult. Then you've got to say, okay, well, we've got to make it easy to get to, or we're going to do something about that. You might want to take out your passes and then look at your fails and then drill down into your fails, and then be able to then click on those and then be able to highlight which ones you actually want to get to. So you can do those sorts of things as well. Okay, so Josh, what do you do with your reporting, just out of interest?
Mate, the biggest thing for me when going out and doing a verification is, like you said, it is configurable. We ensure that when there's a fail, that they are able to actually put in an observation, right? So hopefully that'll zoom in properly. But anyway, we actually give them the room that if there's a no, that we'll let them put in an observation and a comment. The way we are using it is with the dashboards, it's not about counting. It's not a numbers game for us. We really use that, the narrative of the observations, like what's coming in, what was the fail, and then we can look at, is that a systemic issue? So is it only on one piece of equipment, one type of equipment? Is it only on one site? What our CEO does every day is he comes in and opens up the dashboard, and he can see what files have come in overnight, and actually he's got a list of like what the observations were, so he can actually see what people were doing in the field. He'll sometimes actually pick up the phone and ring the supervisor and say, hey, I couldn't see the photo, like what did you find? So and what our board wants to see is they're not so interested in like the count of the critical risks either. They're more interested in, are those control fails one-offs or are they systemic? We couldn't do that in our Excel spreadsheets and doing all this and, running pivot tables and all the rubbish we used to do, because we just couldn't pull out that observational data and really understand what's going on with our critical controls.
Fantastic. The when we're looking at this also, the automation can be doing other stuff as well. So I've actually I've restricted it to critical control management and so forth at the moment. But as a result of that and again, as I said, they're configurable. You can decide what automations you want to occur. So in this particular case, what it actually did is it created an action. It assigned it to a predefined group of people with a due date and a description of urgently investigate XYZ. So you know that there's a follow-up action and that action has to be closed. But you don't have to do those things. You can configure this the way you want. So there's a variety of things that the software has to be able to do. It needs to automate processes. It needs to automate the process of updating, the critical risks and the critical controls and the bow ties and so forth. So you need it to potentially go off and create actions and assign them to people. So you're not waiting for people to do these things manually, and you're saving a fair bit of time by not having to do these things manually. You need to be able to integrate all of these processes, so your inspections and your other type things. You could have external systems like maintenance systems that could be triggering information into the system through our APIs. So if you've got monitoring activities or verification activities that are done through maintenance, there's no reason why you couldn't hook your maintenance system into here and get it to be able to trigger rules and to then be able to integrate with the bow tie analysis. So integration with other systems, integration within the system, automation, and configurability, being able to get it to work the way you want it to work. Because the way Josh uses it may not be the way you use it. And what I find is I've been involved in implementations in quite a large number of companies, and they all do it a bit differently. There's probably no wrong or right way of doing it, but each organisation is a bit different. They have different cultures, different processes, different things that suit them. But the one thing is that the automation, the integration, and the configurability, being able to make it your own, are things that are important. So looking at the
data availability as well, Adrian, like it's just you're able to get access to the data and don't have to go to multiple sources. So one of our key activities when we're doing critical control management is that the HSE team are doing what are called critical control effectiveness reviews. So we'll, on a month-by-month basis, we'll pick a selection of critical controls and do a deep dive on those and have a look at, has the standard changed? Has there been any events associated with that critical control? What are the verifications showing us? If there's been any fails, what are they? Is there any changes that we need to make to the performance standard? All that's done in the system. Like everything is linked. We can just open up the performance standard document and go, we know how many verifications are done. We can have a look at the observations. We can see what events are linked to it. So, for us, it keeps it alive. It actually keeps this idea of critical risk alive just because you can access the information.
Yep, fantastic. Okay, so some of the things about reporting and data analysis, which is what I was touching on with the dashboards, but there's other ones we've done. There's also business intelligence tools like Viking Analytics that allow you to delve more into more analytical areas of it as well. So some of the things that I think are important, view real-time reports. So the information is real in real time. You're not waiting for something to be produced a week later when people have been able to massage their spreadsheets and do whatever else they need to do to it. Alert notifications, real time. People are notified when a critical control failure can occur, or configured to alert the way you want it to alert. You need to be careful there. So it allows you to shift your reporting from reactive to proactive, and I think that's quite important. What I'm seeing, and I think Josh's experience, I suspect, is the same as you're spending less time looking at what's happened in the past with your frequency rate data. You're spending more time in looking at your proactive data to prevent those incidents from happening. And from what I've seen, companies that have done this, they've reduced their frequency rates. So you still look at your frequency rates to see how you've performed, but you're looking at it more from a performance perspective from the past. You're focusing on what's going to happen in the future and making sure that those unwanted events don't happen. I think Josh,
it's
significant
more about control management than stat management, Adrian. So, I mean, we haven't talked about recordable injury frequency rate in our organisation for about 7 years. It's not important. It's not important to the board. They want to know about the controls. They want to know about how effective are our controls? Are they being verified? And where are they degrading, and what can we do about it?
Absolutely. Okay, so act on verifications before they become incidents. You've got your qualitative and quantitative data analysis that you can look at. So because you've got so much data, you can analyze it and you can determine what data is being produced. So simply by answering a question on a form, you produced a massive amount of data just from one question being answered. And then you can take that data into various different tools to be able to analyze it. You can enforce and ensure accountability through workflows and processes. Someone is accountable for a control or an event, MUE, and their name is against it. They'll be receiving reminders through notifications. Other people can see whether people are monitoring these things, so you can enforce a level of accountability. You can make sure that these things are being managed properly. So a review date passes, it's visible. There's a high level of visibility. So you know that these things aren't just being forgotten about. And I think another important component is the continuous improvement side of it. So the feedback that you're getting through the system allows you to continue to improve the controls, continue to do things. If an incident occurs in the either in your organisation or in your industry, you can look at it and continue to look at it and say, okay, there's additional controls we can be putting in place, and we can automate the verification of those controls in the system. So you're not sitting on too often I've seen in the past, people build their bow tie diagrams, put them into a filing cabinet or a disk drive, and they say, we've done critical control management. What's next? By having this process in place, you're embedding the process within the organisation. You're not adding that extra workload. You're allowing the reporting, and you're not jumping from 5 different systems to try to gather that information, which eventually fails because people don't want to do it.
I've been thinking that the whole time. It's so easy, and it creates so much more energy in the staff that are actually going through this process to be able to action what's needed rather than just set and forget, tick a box and put it in a filing cabinet. This allows you to continue to stay on top of it all, doesn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's so important. You need to make sure that you've got a process that's sticky. If you've got an embedded process that becomes part of the way you work, and the only way that can happen is if it's not adding a huge amount of workload to the average person in the field, because they'll be already overloaded with everything else that they do in this day and age.
It's not seen as a chore, is it? It's something that's easy to do and manageable, and it, like I said, it doesn't require excess energy to action something that is so critical. Mind the pun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people in the workforce can see the logic of it, and they can see the importance of it. So if they're seeing that they're doing stuff and it's going nowhere, then they're not going to take it very seriously, which happens.
Look, what really worked for us is we actually, because it's configurable, which means we can do it. So, you don't necessarily have to get myosh involved. It's configurable. So we actually did a lot of co-design with our workforce. So working with them on the question sets that go into the inspections, working on like the symbols, how many inspections, rather than focusing on a critical risk, just focus on work. So, you know, you can put a number of critical controls into one inspection so that you're verifying controls associated with work and not just a risk. So yeah, being able to do that co-design with your employees makes it even more accessible.
That was one of the questions that we had submitted earlier, was how not only configurable, but how scalable is the CCM module to accommodate different size companies and industries? Like it's never ending, is it?
Yeah, so I know David's asked the question, what industry I'm in. So I'm in mine services, so not in like mining as such, mine services. We're a drilling business. Our business, when we put CCM in, probably had a head count of 800, 900 people. We had just started the process, had got the inspections in place, had the performance standards in place, bought another company, and they adopted our CCM module within 3 weeks because it was literally similar work, similar controls, and because the system was easy to, basically all they needed to do was download an app onto their iPads and their phone, train them on like, okay, this is what happens when you put in a fail. This is the information that we need. Easily adopted, really took it on board quite quickly.
Yep. There's some additional
David has also asked, where do you guys think the greatest workload in an organisation, where is the greatest workload in an organisation to configure and operate this module? Has this been a barrier to success in organisations using this?
Well, Adrian can tell one version, then I'll tell the truth. So, having done the work, a lot of people spend the majority of their time trying to get these performance standards for a critical control absolutely perfect, and that will actually slow down the process. The biggest thing from a configuration point of view is when you create your inspections, there's some configuration that's needed to go, this inspection question, what critical control and what critical risk is that associated with? So it's almost that mapping of the verification against the actual rest of the system that probably took the longest, Adrian, working with you guys.
Yep. We weren't talking about like 6 to 12 months though, were we? We were talking a couple of months to get it up and going.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's not and that was for an organisation of, what have you, about 800 people or something?
Yeah, and Christina, when we did it, we didn't have access to the digital bow ties that everyone's got access to now.
Wow.
And yeah, being able to have the bow tie and just going add control and it creates the performance standard. Yeah, that saves weeks and weeks of work. And I'm serious.
Well, without spoiling anything, the best is yet to come. Let me tell you, there is so much more in the pipeline and we're so bloody excited. What, from both of you, obviously, Adrian, from dealing with so many of our clients that implement the CCM module, and from real world examples, Josh, what do you find the most common critical controls are that organisations typically overlook?
It's not vanilla. I'm sorry. I actually don't have one. I actually think it's more not the overlooking, Christina. It's the inclusion of stuff like procedures and permits, like stuff that are not critical controls, that actually clog the system up. So it's not about the absence of controls. I think it's the excess of controls that are critical.
What are your thoughts, Adrian?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same as what Josh was basically saying. So nothing really further to add there. There is a question. Another question was asked about: is there similar changes happening in other states? When I was talking about it the other day, someone actually said it's already happened in WA. I'm personally not across all the legislations in the different states, but I think there's a frustration from the regulators of too many people have been killed not just in mining, but also other industries as well. So construction, a lot of the high-risk industries, but not that this should only be applied to high-risk industries, it could be applied anywhere. And I think what they're looking at is there's ways of preventing these incidents, that the fatalities don't have to happen. And I think what's happening is the regulators are saying, well, we have to do something. We have to do more than what we're doing now. And I think that's what's driving it. So I know that it's already, according to a company that I was talking to, when I mentioned the Queensland legislation, they said, well, it's already in WA, which is where I'm based actually. But so I think it's happening I think people will be looking at what's happening in Queensland, they'll be looking at what's happening everywhere, and they'll start to, a little bit like the harmonised legislation that started to spread fairly quickly. So, yeah, I think personally it's going to spread to different industries. Mining is obviously a specific target due to particularly coal industry and those sorts of areas.
Amazing. If nobody has any other questions, do either of you have any final words to finish off this afternoon?
I'd like to, first of all, thank Josh for joining us today. It's really good to have someone who's actually used the system with experience and is, you know,
using, not past tense.
Yeah, and is used and is using the system on an ongoing basis. And I think it's important that people can actually see that it's not just a technical solution. There are some other aspects to it. But I think one thing that I'm extremely passionate about the CCM module, and it's what excites me about the software, is that I believe it can make a massive difference to an organisation, because I think it's traditionally, I think this has been a scattergun approach. People build their inspections, but there's not a huge amount of rhyme or reason other than what questions should we put in an inspection. My feeling with CCM is it's providing a very, very targeted approach of what's important and what we need to do to make sure these events don't occur, as opposed to being reactive. So that's probably my biggest takeaway, in that it's probably the most single important thing you can do in your organisation with regards to health and safety. No, in fact, I won't even say probably. I believe it is, without a doubt. Anything from you, Josh?
My number one would be how configurable this system is, right? That it's not you have to get everyone's vote to make a change. That, you know, there's more, like you said, Adrian, I don't have to rely on users in agriculture or construction and the way they're using the system to ask myosh to make a change. I can do it because it's my system. I'm quite genuine. It has changed our business. It's changed our business in what leaders focus on, what matters most in the field. But the biggest change critical risk management's done is it's changed work. Like, it's changed the design of work. It's helped us really understand the things that matter, guarding that's really difficult to use, things that aren't accessible. Like, it's actually helped us look at work design and make better work for our people, which changes the conditions. And for me, I think there's been too much reliance on the behaviour of people and bad apples. This is organisations taking ownership of energies that can kill people in their environments, in their work environments, and this enables them to do something about it.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Christina.
Not a problem. Thank you, guys. And thank you, everybody that has logged on and joined us today. Like I said, we will be sending out this recording to everybody that's registered, as well as it will be on our website, our social media sites, and our YouTube channel as well. For any questions that have gone unanswered or anything in between, we will reach out to you as well. And I'm quite sure Adrian and Josh will be more than happy to answer any other questions you have. So please get in touch with us. You all have our details, so we'd be more than happy to help you out. And I think that's it. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Josh. It's been wonderful. And we'll all chat to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.